My name is Ethan Carter. I have 38 years old and I live in Seattle, Washington. I've always been a man of logic. I grew up surrounded by technology, numbers, and certainties. While others sought answers in churches or ancient scriptures, I found comfort in the silence of codes, in mathematical formulas, in science. My father was a Southern Baptist minister in Georgia. I grew up hearing fiery sermons about heaven, hell, and a God who loved but also condemned. When my mother died of cancer when I was 10, I heard my father say it was God's will. It killed what faith I had left. Since then, I have built a fortress. Not an emotional one, a technological one. I became a programmer. I dove into the world of artificial intelligence. I was hired by a startup that promised to change the world with algorithms. And I believed, not in miracles, but in data. For years, I scoffed at any mention of religion. In meetings, at company lunches, and online discussion groups, if anyone mentioned faith, I was the first to scoff. Not with hatred, but with the contempt of someone who thinks they know too much. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what was to come. One night, one turn, 1 second of distraction, and my life was over. Literally. And that's where it all began. It was a Friday night, rainy, like so many in Seattle. I'd gotten off work late, my head spinning, listening to a podcast about scientific skepticism as I drove down a back road into the country. The host's voice was talking about how spiritual experiences are just neurochemical glitches in the brain. I agreed. I always had. The road was dark, surrounded by tall pine trees. There was no lighting, just my car's headlights cutting through the wet darkness. I wasn't racing, but I wasn't 100% present either. An email from the company was worrying me, and I glanced at my phone. 1 second. Just one. It was at that second that I saw the deer's eyes. Big, shining in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded. I hit the guardrail and was thrown against the steering wheel. I felt the air being knocked from my lungs, the sound of metal twisting, the impact. And then, silence. I don't know how much time has passed. Everything went dark. I couldn't move. An intense pain shot through my chest. I remember hearing voices from far away as if they were underwater. Sirens, screams. Then a man, probably a paramedic, saying something like, "No pulse." That's how I discovered later that my heart had stopped. 6 minutes. It was the time I was clinically dead. 6 minutes out of this world. In the ambulance, they did everything they could to revive me. At the hospital, the doctors were ready to declare me dead. They put me on a stretcher and prepared the paperwork. But then, something happened. Something no one expected. Something that science cannot explain. And that, to this day, gives me goosebumps just remembering it. But before that, there was a void. A kind of silence that doesn't exist here. A living, almost conscious darkness. And it was there, in that space between the end and the impossible, that everything began to change. You may not believe it. Neither would I if I heard it from someone else, but I lived. And now, I need to tell you. No heartbeat. That was what the nurse said, as I was told later. The heart monitor showed a flat line. My body was there, motionless, cold, my eyes half open. Butu is no longer there. The hospital report states cardiorespiratory arrest at 9:47 p.m. Time without cardiac activity, approximately 6 minutes. They did everything. CPR, defibrillator, adrenaline. 3 shocks. Nothing. To the medical staff at Harborview Medical Center, I was just another fatality. Male, 38, serious car accident, multiple fractures, and death by cardiac arrest. Time of death, 9:53 p.m. But the truth is that 2 didn't die, at least not the way science understands it. I remember with terrifying clarity the moment I left my body. It wasn't like the movies or the fancy stories. It was strange, uncomfortable, like I'd been ripped from myself. I floated, literally. I saw the doctors working, the rush, the desperation in the eyes of a young resident who looked about my age. She held my hand, as if that could stop me from leaving. It was a human gesture, and that touched me. But at the same time, it all seemed irrelevant. The body on the stretcher was just a shell, an old piece of clothing. You was somewhere else, a place without time, without walls, a place between worlds. All around me was darkness, not scary, but deep, silent, almost welcoming. I felt no pain, no fear, Just a strange kind of peace, a complete suspension of what we call life. Then suddenly I felt like I was being pulled, not by my hands, but by an invisible force, like gravity. I began to be pulled toward something I couldn't see, but felt, and that's when the light appeared. At first it was a distant dot, small, faint, but as I got closer, it became larger, more intense. I couldn't see it with my eyes, because I had no eyes, but I perceived with a clarity that no physical sense had ever given me. And the craziest thing, this light not only illuminated, it knew me. I knew who I was, I knew what I did, and yet, he welcomed me. It's hard to explain this with words. In fact, all of this seems impossible to translate because what I felt at that moment goes beyond what any language can express. But what matters is that it was real, more real than anything I've ever experienced. And as I was pulled into that light, something began to awaken inside me, something that had been buried long ago, a feeling I hadn't felt since I was a child, before the pain, before the anger, before the skepticism. It was there, on that threshold between life and death, that I realized I was about to meet someone. I've never been a fan of silence. I've always preferred the noise of the city, the artificial voice of voice assistants, the sound of notifications telling me what was happening in the world. But there, in that place where I found myself, the silence was absolute. Not the kind of silence that bothers you, but the kind that makes you realize how much you've always been running away from yourself. Floating in that void, I realized that there was no more body, time, pain, or rational thought. It was like being suspended between two worlds, but not knowing if either of them still belonged to me. You might think I'm exaggerating, that maybe it was a delusion of my failing brain. I would think so too if I hadn't lived. But there's no way to rationally explain what I felt. I was fully conscious. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't an illusion. I was agreed, and more alive than ever. The dark was not black. It was an absence of everything, as if the universe had stopped existing, and all that was left was me, and a space where things no longer needed to have form. There were no sounds, no smells, no sights, only pure consciousness. It was in this absolute silence that I began to feel presences. I saw no faces, no human figures, but I knew I was not alone. It was as if thousands of eyes were looking at me, not with judgment, but with deep, almost loving attention. And then a question, silent yet thunderous, pierced that void. It wasn't made with words, but it hit me like a wave. Do you know who you are? For the first time in a long time, I didn't know how to answer. On Earth, I was Ethan Carter, atheist, programmer, man of logic. But there, those titles were worth nothing. There, everything I had done, said, hidden, all was known. There was no way to lie, pretend, or argue. I was seen in full. And yet, that presence did not condemn me. I felt a deep shame, as if every moment I had ignored someone, hurt someone, laughed at someone. They were all flashing before me, like quick but devastating flashes. Every wrong choice, every act of selfishness, every denial of what I had called spirituality. But along with that came a strange feeling, compassion, no mercy, no excuse. It was as if something or someone said, I know, and yet, I'm here. I didn't know if I was going crazy or waking up, but one thing was certain, I was being taken somewhere, and that place was getting closer and closer. The light that was once a distant point now enveloped me, and in the center of that light, there was a figure, not a man, not a being. It was more, a presence. And even without seeing it with my eyes, I knew, with every fiber of my being, it was him. The light enveloped me like a hug I never knew I needed. It was no ordinary light. It didn't hurt the eyes. It didn't blind. It was a living light, warm, smart, and more than anything, conscious. I was pulled into it. I didn't walk. I didn't float. I went. As if all of this had always been destined, even though my entire life had been built denying any possibility of what I was now experiencing. As I entered this space, I realized that it was not made of matter. There was no floor, no walls, no sky. But it was not a void either. It was like being within a presence, enveloped by something that knew me to the darkest corners of my soul. And in the center of this light, a figure took shape. It wasn't like in paintings or like in religious representations. There was no beard, no robe, no crown. But it was him. I knew it. It was as if my spirit had remembered something that my brain had always refused to accept. Jesus. He didn't say his name. He didn't need to. His presence was so intense, so full of love and firmness, that it could only be him. And in that moment, everything inside me that was still resisting fell. My pride, my arrogance, my certainty that nothing existed beyond what the eyes could see. Everything fell apart. Jesus did not accuse me. He did not charge me. He just showed. Every scene of my life flashed before me as if we were watching a movie, except I felt what others felt. The pain I caused, the hope I broke, the love I refused. And then he spoke, not with my mouth, but inside me. You denied me with words, but called me with your heart. That sentence hit me like a bolt of lightning. I fell or floated or collapsed, I don't even know. I just cried. Because there, before him, I realized that my whole life had been a desperate search for something that had always been there, waiting for me. By the way, let me ask you something without forcing you to believe anything. Have you ever felt like there was something or someone calling you, even though you ignored it? If so, comment here. No need to explain yourself, just write. I felt it. You may have no idea how much your comment can touch someone else who is feeling lost right now. Coming back, the light around it began to pulse, as if it had a rhythm of its own. And then Jesus told me I couldn't stay. Not yet. There was something I needed to do. Before I could ask what it was, he approached. And that's when he gave me away. The message. His presence was impossible to describe. There were no words or human concepts that could convey what it was like to be in the presence of something that transcends time, space, and understanding. But there was something even more disturbing than Jesus' presence itself. The feeling that I've always known him. Not as a character in stories, not as a religious figure, but like a part of me. Forgotten. He didn't say much. Jesus didn't need to explain who he was or justify his existence. His mere presence was the answer in itself. But what he showed me with brutal clarity was who I was. He took me through memories that were dormant, not just mine, but those of people I have touched, influenced, hurt, or helped throughout my life. Every word, every choice, every gesture, everything had consequences, and it was not a punitive trial. It was a mirror, and seeing my life in this light was both liberating and painful. There was a time, for example, when I ignored a coworker who was clearly experiencing depression. I remember thinking, it's not my problem. And now, I felt the impact of that indifference on his soul, like an echo. In another, I saw my mother in the last days of her life, asking me to pray with her. I laughed. I said it was a waste of time. At that moment, I saw his pain, and for the first time I felt how much she just wanted me to believe. For her, just for a moment. Every scene tore me apart inside, but it also healed. Jesus looked at me, not with disapproval but with a firmness full of compassion. It was as if he said, yes, you failed, but now you understand, and that changes everything. And then, he delivered the message to me. He came closer. The light around him grew brighter, and then in silence, happened something inside me, not with gestures, not with words. It went straight to the heart of my existence. The message was simple, and at the same time devastating. The truth is not in what you believe, but in the love you refuse to feel. It was like an internal explosion, as if my soul had been pierced by 1,000 suns, because deep down, I knew. Throughout my life, I have not denied God. I denied love. I refused to feel. I refused to depend. I refused to open up, out of fear, for pride, for pain. And now, he was telling me that it was this love, not doctrines, not theories, not arguments, that really mattered. And then, as if he had accomplished what he needed to, Jesus said to me, you need to go back. There's something only you can say. I wanted to beg to stay. For the first time, I had no answers, no resistance, just a desire to stay in that light forever. But before he could react, everything started to move away. The light, the presence, the space. Everything vanished like smoke in the wind. And then came the fall. I fell. That was the feeling. As if I were being torn from a paradise where I had finally found my place and thrown back into the density of matter, of time, of pain. I felt the weight of my body before I even opened my eyes. A brutal return. The lungs were burning. His chest was burning. The throat dry. It was like being born again, only with the awareness of everything I had left behind. I woke up in a hospital room. Screaming, monitors beeping, voices running around. My vision was blurry, but I could clearly hear one of the doctors saying, "He's back, oh my God, he's back." I didn't know where I was. I didn't know how much time had passed. I only knew one thing. I was not the same anymore. I tried to speak, but my voice was weak. All I could manage was a whisper. "He sent me back." A nurse approached. She looked scared, but there was also a sense of awe in her eyes, as if she had witnessed something extraordinary. They asked me my name, my date of birth. I answered, but deep down it all seemed so small, so irrelevant. I had just returned from a place where time did not exist, where the soul was more real than the body, where human logic fell apart before a single truth. Love is the basis of everything. During the following days, while I was still in the hospital, I tried to tell what I had experienced. Some doctors listened to me in silence, others exchanged skeptical looks as if they were thinking, a hallucination typical of cardiac arrest. But I knew what I received. It wasn't just for me. The message Jesus gave me echoed within me, day and night. It came as a whisper, and at the same time as a scream. The truth is not in what you believe, but in the love you refuse to feel. I thought about how many times I chose not to love. How many times have I let pride win? How many times have I judged, ignored, hurt, even though I thought I was right? His message took me apart, and at the same time I rebuilt myself. I started writing everything down, every detail of the experience, not to prove anything, but to not forget. Because even though I came back, there was a part of me that stayed there, and that part now demanded action from me. It was at that moment that I realized the message needed to be spread, and it wasn't about religion. It was about reconnection, about getting back to basics. As I looked out the hospital window, watching the rain fall over Seattle, I thought about how many people were walking around feeling the same emptiness I felt before my accident, and how a simple choice of love could change everything. Coming back was not easy. Coming back was a burden, but it was also a privilege, and I knew this mission was just beginning. Coming back was the biggest shock of my life. I thought dying was scary, but what was really scary was opening my eyes again, feeling the weight of my body and realizing that the world here it was still the same, but you was no more. The hospital felt cold. Sounds were harsh. Voices sounded distant. Everything was saturated, as if my senses were on another level, and this plane, the physical, had lost its sharpness. The only thing I could feel clearly was the urgency, an urgency that was not physical. It was spiritual, as if a silent voice said, "Don't forget, don't get distracted, don't go back to sleep." I was kept under observation for 3 days. Doctors came to examine me all the time. Some treated me as if I had been a clinical miracle. Others looked askance at me, preferring to believe that everything was just a hallucination caused by cerebral hypoxia. But I knew, and I didn't care who believed or not, because what I lived, no one could take it from me. On the 3rd day, I asked for something that no one expected of me, a Bible. The nurse looked at me as if I had made a bad joke. "Do you want a Bible?" she asked, confused. I just nodded, tears streaming down my face. Yes, I wanted to. Not because I had suddenly become religious, but because that message, that presence, that love, all of it was calling me to more, and I couldn't ignore it. When my sister came to visit me, she cried when she saw me, but her tears turned to disbelief when I began to tell her what I had experienced. "Have you seen Jesus? Try. And he spoke to you? Try. And you believe now?" This question crossed my mind. It wasn't about believing. It was about to feel, to live, to change. I told her, I have no faith anymore. Am sure. After being discharged, I returned home, but I didn't return to the same life. I couldn't work the same way anymore. I couldn't see people the same way anymore. It was as if, suddenly, I saw souls instead of faces. And then, for the first time in years, I went to church. Not a big cathedral, not a megachurch, just a small chapel in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. I went in and sat on the last bench, and I cried, not from sadness, but of wake up. While people were praying, I just said one thing, silently, "Use me, guide me, make me remember. From then on, my life took a new path. I started looking for ways to serve, to love, to share that message, even if they mocked, even if they doubted, because I knew coming back had a purpose. And now, my mission was to fulfill that purpose. With every breath, with every word, with every gesture, I didn't decide to change. The change simply, it happened. It was as if that encounter had reprogrammed everything inside me. My thoughts, my priorities, my way of looking at the world. The first few days after I got home, I could barely sleep. Not because I was insomniac, but because something inside me was on fire. A constant energy, like I was on a mission. And in a way, I was. I started with the simplest thing. I looked at who was nearby. I asked my sister for forgiveness for years of coldness. I called my father, whom I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. It no longer mattered who was right or wrong. It mattered, Amar. That's what the message said. I went back to that little chapel on Capitol Hill several times. At first, I just sat there in silence. Then I started talking to the pastor. He didn't talk about religion. He talked about purpose. He listened to me with attentive eyes, and one day he said, "You didn't come back just to live. You came back to wake up those who are still sleeping." Those words stayed with me. It was then that I started something I never imagined. Visit homeless people. Seattle has a lot of people. Invisible people. People I would have crossed the street to avoid in the past. But now, I saw something in them that I had never seen before. God. I took blankets, then food, but most importantly, ears. Conversations, looking into each other's eyes. People who didn't want sermons or coins. I just wanted to be seen. One of them, called Raymond, marked me. War veteran, estranged from his family, drug addict. He sat down next to me on a wet sidewalk and said, "You have something in your eyes. A light. You saw something, didn't you?" I cried in front of him, and I told my story. He was silent. Then he said to me, "Maybe I still have salvation then." Those words pierced me, because it was exactly this. Everyone has salvation. Everyone has a chance. Everyone has a spark of God within them. I was no longer Ethan, the arrogant atheist. Now, I was just a man who saw the impossible and came back to remind the world that there's more to it than that. I didn't become a pastor, nor a missionary, but I became something more powerful, witness. And this transformation wasn't just about me. People around me started to notice. Co-workers said I was lighter, more present. One of them, Mark, took me aside and asked, "Are you okay? You look like a different person." I smiled, and I replied, "It's because I died, Mark, and I came back different." He thought it was a joke, but when he looked into my eyes, he knew it was true. This transformation for me was not a choice. It was a consequence. And when you experience something so strong, so real, so deep, you can't just move on. You need to share. I knew it wouldn't be easy. From the first day I came back, I understood that carrying this story would be a burden, but I never imagined the real weight it would have, the weight of other people's doubts. At first, it was just sideways glances, that kind of expression people make when they don't want to offend you, but they also don't believe a word you're saying. Then came the comments. Subtle, disguised as concern. Did he have some kind of breakdown? Maybe it's post-accident trauma. Ethan was always a skeptic. Now he's turned into a fanatic? What surprised me most was not the doubt itself. It was from who she came from. My former college classmates, great defenders of rationalism, began to ridicule me on forums. One of them, Stephen, published an article mocking my account. From Code to Creed. How death made a programmer lose his mind. It hurt. Very. Because I never sought the spotlight. I just wanted to tell you what I experienced. What transformed me. But what hurt me the most was the separation from an old friend, Daniel. A staunch atheist, as I was, he was one of the first people I told about my experience. He listened in silence. Finally, he said, "You were my last pillar of logic. Now I can't even trust you." I was left without an answer. I started to wonder, was I going crazy? Was what I experienced really real? Or a delusion created by a collapsing brain? These doubts haunted my nights. Until one morning, while I was walking aimlessly around the living room, I opened the Bible. She fell alone in John 20:29. "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." It was like he was talking to me again. It wasn't about convincing others. It was about live the truth even when no one else believes. Faith is not about proof. It's about presence. And I had felt that presence, not as a concept, but as a reality stronger than anything I had ever known. So instead of debating, I kept quiet. Instead of lashing out at insults, I loved it. And I let my life speak for itself. Some began to notice. Even though they didn't believe my story, they said I seemed calmer, more centered. Others, little by little, started talking to me again, not about religion but about purpose. And it was on this silent path that I discovered something powerful. The greatest testimony is not in words. It is in actions. I didn't need to prove anything. Because the truth, when it is real, needs no defense. It just needs to be lived. It wasn't planned. In fact, I didn't even want to appear. The idea of putting my story out there made me nauseous. I was afraid of exposure, of judgment, of trivializing something so sacred. But some people in the chapel began to insist, "Ethan, you need to tell this. People need to hear." At first I resisted, but something inside me said, "This isn't just yours anymore." So I accepted. We recorded with a simple camera in a modest room in the church. No scenery, effects, dramatic editing. Just me sitting down, telling what I experienced, with a trembling voice, with teary eyes, with all my heart. I told you everything. The accident, the light, the encounter with Jesus, the message, the return, the transformation. It was 42 minutes of recording. No cuts, no script. We posted it to YouTube on a regular Wednesday night. A video lost among so many others. I closed the notebook and went to sleep, without expecting anything. The next day, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages, notifications, calls. I opened the video. 3,000 views in less than 12 hours. Something was happening. People were watching and commenting. Not with hate, but with wanted, with gratitude, with wake up. I never believed it, but your story touched me in a way I can't explain. I cried from start to finish. Thank you for sharing. I started praying again after 15 years. Something inside me was ignited. And then the video exploded. 100,000, 300,000, 500,000. In 1 week, 0.2 million views. Interview invitations began to pour in. Podcasts, Christian programs, even secular channels wanted to know what this man had been through. Some presenters tried to cast doubt. Others wanted to explore out of curiosity. But I kept my focus. I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm here to tell what I experienced. And the more I talked, the more people came up saying, "I went through that too. I saw that light. I heard that voice." Suddenly, I was no longer alone. My story had opened a portal into the lives of thousands. People who never talked about faith. People who believed they were too broken, too lost, too dirty to be touched by God. But now, they were waking up. That's when I realized. The miracle wasn't just that I came back. The miracle was what my return was causing. I started receiving messages from faraway places. Mexico, the Philippines, Nigeria, Brazil. People saying they wanted to change, forgive, love again. All because of a simple video, from a true account. And I understood. The message wasn't for me. It was for the world. And the world was listening. Life went on, but never the same again. Each dawn began to have another value. Each face, another meaning. Each silence, another depth. I was no longer just here existing. Now I lived with a mission. And even though everything around me was still the same, the traffic, the emails, the news, the noises inside me, there was a constant presence, a memory, a call. People ask me all the time, "Ethan, do you believe in God now?" My answer is always the same. I don't believe it, we. And when people ask me what Jesus told me, what he really meant by that phrase, I can only answer with what was engraved in me with fire. The truth is not in what you believe, but in the love you refuse to feel. It took me a while to understand that sentence, but today she guides me, because I realize that deep down, what distances us most from God is not error, nor doubt, nor weakness. It's pride. It's the fear of loving, to surrender, to allow ourselves to feel something greater than ourselves. How many times have we rejected a hug, a request for forgiveness, a kind word, just because we have built walls around our hearts? How many times do we rationalize everything because we are terrified of feeling vulnerable? And that's exactly where God comes in, not in dogmas, but in that space that we open when we finally let love pass through us. If you've made it this far, You might be feeling something different right now. Maybe a memory came back. Perhaps an old pain has stirred. Or maybe a hope has been rekindled. I didn't come to convert you. I didn't come to convince you. I just came to remind you. You are more than you think you are, and you are loved more than you will ever understand. If my story touched you, if it opened something inside you that you can't name, then my purpose is fulfilled. But if it made you reflect, just for a moment, on what really matters, so I ask you one thing: don't let this die. Go back to the one you pushed away. Forgive those who hurt you. Say I love you to someone who has been waiting years to hear it. Connect with God, your way, but don't ignore what you felt here, because I came back from death with a mission, and now it's in your hands. If this story spoke to you, share it, not by me, but for whom you may be one step away from giving up, for those who need to know that the impossible still happens, and that love always wins. If you've made it this far, if this story touched you in any way, then this channel is for you. Click on the button subscribe, activate the bell, because there are still many real, transformative, and impossible to ignore stories coming your way. Here, each video is made to make you feel, reflect, and maybe even change your life. If something awakened within you, comment below. I felt the presence. It may seem simple, but this comment could spark something in someone else. You have no idea the power this has. And of course, leave the like, because it shows us, and YouTube, that this message needs to go further. And if you can share it with someone who needs to hear this today. And now, it doesn't stop here. There is another video appearing on the screen. Click on it. The next story might be just what your heart is searching for.